In 1945, the story of one of the most infamous figures in human history seemingly came to an end in a bunker beneath the rubble of Berlin. For decades, historians pored over every document, every eyewitness account, and every grainy photograph to understand the origins of the man who plunged the world into its most horrific conflict. But while the paper trail was exhaustive, there was one piece of evidence that remained locked away for over half a century: his own genetic code. Recent scientific breakthroughs in DNA sequencing have allowed researchers to do something once thought impossible. By tracking down living relatives and using forensic biological techniques, scientists have finally peeked into the ancestral truth of Adolf Hitler. What they found didn't just add a footnote to history. It provided a revelation that fundamentally shatters the very foundations of the ideology he used to justify his actions. The truth of his ancestry is not a story of a pure, mythical heritage, but a complex map of human migration that leads to the very people and regions he sought to exclude from humanity. To understand why these DNA results are so revolutionary, we have to look at the obsession with pedigree that defined the early 20th century. Hitler wasn't just a leader. He was a gatekeeper who promoted a vision of human hierarchy based on so-called purity. He spoke of a superior lineage that had remained untouched by the blending of cultures and ethnicities. He demanded that everyone around him prove their ancestry back several generations. Yet, ironically, his own family tree was a source of deep anxiety and mystery even for him. He grew up in an era where birth records in small Austrian villages were often incomplete or obscured by family secrets. This cloud of uncertainty fueled rumors for decades, but it took the precision of modern science to finally clear the air. A few years ago, a team of researchers, led by journalist Jean-Paul Mulders and historian Mark Vermeer, embarked on a mission to solve the mystery through genetics. They didn't have a direct sample from the man himself, as his remains had been cremated or lost to time. Instead, they used a method known as genetic triangulation, most of whom were living under assumed names in various parts of the world, from the forests of Long Island to the quiet villages of Austria. By collecting saliva samples from these descendants and analyzing their Y chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA, the scientists were able to reconstruct a remarkably accurate picture of the family's ancestral journey. The first major shock came when they analyzed a specific group of genetic markers known as haplogroups. A haplogroup is essentially a biological signature that tracks the movement of our ancestors over thousands of years. It acts as a set of coordinates on the map of human history. The researchers were looking for markers that would indicate a lineage deeply rooted in the heart of Northern Europe, as the ideology of the time suggested, but the results pointed in a drastically different direction. They found a high concentration of the haplogroup E1b1b. Those numbers and letters might not mean much, but to a geneticist, they are a loud and clear message. This specific marker is rare in Western and Northern Europe. In fact, it is most commonly found in populations from North Africa, particularly among the Berber tribes of Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. It is also found frequently among Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jewish populations. This was the ultimate historical irony. The man who claimed to represent the pinnacle of a specific European lineage carried within his own cells a biological signature that indicated a deep, ancestral connection to the very groups he marginalized. DNA does not define a person's identity in the present, but it tells a story of where their lineage has been over 10,000 years. This haplogroup suggests that many generations ago, Hitler's ancestors migrated from Africa into the Middle East and eventually into Europe, likely settling in the Mediterranean before moving north into Austria. This is the reality of all human history. We are a species of migrants. There is no such thing as a closed-off, pure biological line. Every single person on Earth is a beautiful, complex mixture of the entire world's history. But for a man whose power was built on the denial of that truth, these results are a profound scientific rebuke. The discovery sent ripples through the academic community. There were reports from his contemporaries that he was intensely paranoid about his own grandfather, because his father, Alois, was born to an unwed mother, Maria Anna Schicklgruber. The identity of the paternal grandfather was never officially recorded. This gap in the records haunted Hitler. He even ordered the secret police to investigate his own family tree in the 1930s, to ensure no surprises were waiting for him. It seems his intuition was right that the records were hiding a story, but he likely never imagined that the story was written in his DNA. The science of haplogroups has advanced significantly since that initial study, and further testing has confirmed the presence of these Mediterranean and African markers in the lineage. It forces us to confront the absurdity of the concepts of purity. If the most prominent advocate for a specific genetic hierarchy couldn't even meet his own standards, then the entire system falls apart under its own weight. It proves that the maps we draw and the borders we create are invisible to nature. Our biology is a record of connection, not separation. This genetic revelation also highlights the incredible progress we've made in the field of ancient and forensic DNA. 20 years ago, we couldn't have tracked these lineages with such precision. Today, we can take a tiny fragment of biological material and trace the footsteps of an ancestor from 20,000 years ago. We are living in an era where science is a truth-teller that doesn't care about the narratives humans try to construct for themselves. It is a tool for radical honesty. When we look at the aftermath of these findings, we see a more humanized, albeit complicated, view of history. It reminds us that every person we encounter is a cousin to every other person. When you go back far enough, every branch of the human tree eventually meets at the same trunk. The Berbers of North Africa, the indigenous peoples of the Middle East, and the farmers of the Austrian Alps are all part of the same genetic tapestry. The revelation about this specific ancestry is a powerful reminder that hate is not just ethically wrong, it is scientifically illiterate. Beyond the specific haplogroup, the DNA study revealed other interesting traits common in the family line. Researchers looked at the genetic markers for physical health and found that the lineage was plagued by various health issues, many of which Hitler attempted to hide from the public during his rise to power. He wanted to project an image of a biological Superman, but the reality was a man struggling with chronic digestive issues, neurological tremors, and a fragile constitution. Science shows us that he was a man of significant biological weakness. Far from the ideal he preached, the project to track down the living relatives was a feat of investigative excellence. Many of these individuals were reluctant to participate, for obvious reasons. They had spent their lives trying to escape the shadow of their name, but those who did provide samples helped to close a chapter of historical speculation with scientific certainty. By focusing on the DNA of those who share his blood, we were able to obtain the closest thing possible to a sample from the man himself. This discovery also brings to light the role of a specific region in Austria called the Waldviertel. This was the isolated, rugged area where the family originated for generations. For a long time, historians assumed this isolation meant there was very little outside genetic influence. But science tells us otherwise. Even in the most remote valleys of Europe, the movement of people via trade, war, and migration ensures that the gene pool is constantly being refreshed. The Waldviertel was not a secluded island. It was a crossroads for a species that has been on the move since it first left the African continent. The Berbers of North Africa, who share this genetic marker, are known for their incredible resilience and their own complex history of resistance. The fact that this lineage moved from the edges of the Sahara into the heart of Europe is a testament to the strength of human endurance. It is a story of survival that spans continents and millennia. To see this story end up in the DNA of someone who wanted to stop the flow of history is a beautiful, cosmic irony that historians are still grappling with today. How can a man convince millions of people to believe in a specific biological lie when he himself is the living contradiction of that lie? It shows the power of propaganda over reality. It shows that when humans want to believe in a specific hierarchy, they will ignore the evidence right in front of them. Today we have the advantage of DNA evidence to act as a safeguard against such delusions. We can point to the code and say, look, the truth is much more inclusive than we ever imagined. The scientific community continues to refine these methods. Our database of human haplogroups grows larger, allowing us to map the migration of our species with even finer detail. We are finding that many of the supposed divisions between human groups are actually quite recent developments. At the genetic level, we are remarkably similar. The differences in skin color, shape, or height are just the result of our ancestors adapting to different climates over a relatively short period of time. Beneath those surface-level adaptations, the core of our humanity remains the same. The revelation of Hitler's DNA has also served as a catalyst for other historical DNA projects. Scientists are now looking at the remains of other major historical figures to understand their origins. We are finding that the history books frequently miss the biological reality of the people they describe. Just as mobile, and just as interconnected as our present, The myth of the isolated, static population is being dismantled one sequence at a time. For the living relatives who participated in the study, the results provided a sense of closure, though perhaps not the kind they expected. To find out that your family line carries markers from North Africa and the Middle East is a fascinating discovery for anyone. But in this specific context, it carries a heavy weight. It serves as a reminder that we are not responsible for the actions of our ancestors, but we are responsible for the truth we choose to acknowledge about them. Historians who once relied solely on dusty archives are now working hand in hand with geneticists in white lab coats. This interdisciplinary approach is the future of historical research. It allows us to verify claims that were previously based on hearsay or partially destroyed documents. If a leader claims a certain lineage, we no longer have to take their word for it. We can look at the DNA. This creates a level of accountability that was never before possible in human history. As we look at the globe today, we see the same patterns of migration continuing. People are moving across borders, falling in love and starting families, creating an even more complex and beautiful human tapestry. Science tells us that this is not something to be feared. It is the natural state of our species. The blending of genes leads to greater resilience and health. The attempt to stop this process is not just an attempt to control people. It is an attempt to fight against the very biological engine that has allowed humans to survive and thrive for nearly 300,000 years. The Mediterranean world, from which Hitler's ancestors likely hailed before moving north, was the great melting pot of the ancient world. Phoenicians, Romans, Greeks, and North Africans all contributed to a shared genetic heritage. This area was the cradle of civilization precisely because it was so interconnected. The ideas and the genes that flowed through the Mediterranean were the building blocks of the modern world. Hitler's lineage was a product of that great cultural and biological exchange. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, the specific marker, E1b1b, also tells us about the arrival of agriculture in Europe. This haplogroup is often associated with the Neolithic farmers who moved into the continent from the Near East and North Africa thousands of years ago, bringing with them the technology and the food sources that would allow for the rise of permanent settlements. This means that Hitler's ancestors were likely among those early pioneers who helped build the foundations of European society. Again, the irony is immense. The people who were the architects of the continent's success were the very ones he attempted to label as outsiders. The impact of this scientific discovery goes far beyond the biography of one man. It is a lesson for all of humanity. It teaches us that our prejudices are built on foundations of sand. When we try to draw a circle around ourselves and say, "We are the only ones who belong here," science comes along and shows us that 100 other groups are already inside that circle with us. It is a call for a more humble and honest understanding of what it means to be human. In the decades since the 2010 study, other researchers have conducted follow-up tests as the technology improved. They have looked at autosomal DNA, which provides a broader view of a person's entire ancestry across all their lines, not just the paternal one. These tests have corroborated the initial findings, showing a diverse heritage that includes significant Alpine, Mediterranean, and Eastern European signatures. It is a portrait of a man who was a typical product of the European crossroads, a mixture of many different groups. This scientific revelation also helps us understand the psychology of the era. The intense desire to prove an untainted heritage was a reaction to the rapid changes and the mixing that were happening as the world became more industrial and connected. People were clinging to myths of the past because they were afraid of the future. Hitler tapped into that fear, but he did so while ignoring his own reality. It is a classic case of projection. He sought to purge in others what he most feared in himself, the evidence of a common, shared humanity. The Berbers, whose genetic signature is such a large part of this story, are a people with a history of tens of thousands of years. They have their own languages, their own traditions, and their own profound connection to the land. They have survived every major empire that tried to conquer them. To think that their biological legacy would end up in the DNA of a man in a bunker in Berlin is a reminder of how vast and unpredictable human history is. It shows that no matter how hard we try to control the narrative, the truth has a way of surfacing. Modern genetic testing is also revealing similar surprises for many other people who consider themselves part of a pure group. As more people take at-home DNA tests, the number of individuals discovering unexpected North African, Middle East, or Central Asian heritage is skyrocketing. It is a mass awakening to the reality of our species. We are finding that our family trees are not straight lines, but interconnected webs. We are all more mixed than we think, and that is our greatest strength. The team that conducted the DNA project was careful to ensure that their findings were used for historical and scientific purposes, not for political ones. But the political implications are unavoidable. This study provides a definitive scientific no to the concepts of racial superiority. It proves that there is no biological basis for such claims. Looking forward, the field of paleogenomics will likely continue to uncover more such shocks. We are beginning to sequence the DNA of entire ancient cities, allowing us to see how populations changed over centuries. We are finding that there were no pure groups even 5,000 years ago. People were always migrating, always trading, and always forming new communities. The story of human history is a story of fluidity. The living relatives of Hitler who provided the DNA for this study have mostly continued to live quiet lives. They don't seek the spotlight, and they don't want to be associated with the man's actions. But by allowing their DNA to be tested, they have done a great service to history. They have helped to ensure that the myth of a pure lineage can never again be used with any shred of scientific credibility. They have provided the biological evidence needed to close the door on a dark chapter of history. It is fascinating to think about what the reaction would have been in the 1930s if this technology had existed. If Hitler had been required to take a public DNA test to prove his credentials, the history of the world might have been very different. It is a reminder that transparency and science are the greatest enemies of authoritarianism. Authoritarian leaders rely on myths and half-truths to maintain power. Science, on the other hand, deals in cold, hard facts that can be verified by anyone with a microscope and a sequencer. The E1b1b haplogroup is a reminder of the long, arduous journey that our ancestors took to get us where we are today. Escaped predators, and found ways to thrive in new environments. We carry the record of those victories in our cells. To dismiss any part of that heritage is to dismiss the very things that made us who we are. Our DNA is a treasure map of thousands of years of human triumph. Historians today are more cautious when they write about the origins of any group or individual. They now understand that the documents they read are often written by people with an agenda. DNA, however, has no agenda. It just is. It provides a baseline of truth that can be used to anchor our historical narratives in reality. This is particularly important when dealing with figures who spent so much time and effort trying to construct a false reality for themselves and their followers. As we move further into the 21st century, the story of Hitler's DNA will remain one of the most powerful examples of how science can illuminate the past. It is a story of how a small invisible strand of molecules can speak louder than 1,000 speeches. It is a story of how the very people who were most hated by a system were actually a fundamental part of the biological line that created its leader. It is the ultimate historical irony, and a powerful lesson for the future. The Berber influence, the Mediterranean crossover, the Celtic and Alpine mixture, all of these elements created the man. And all of these elements exist in millions of people today. We are a mosaic of our past. We are the sum of every migration, every ancient farmer, and every traveler who ever crossed a mountain range or a sea. When we embrace this truth, we move closer to a world where we can value each other for our common humanity, rather than for a myth of separation. The researchers in 2010 were looking for a shock, and they certainly found one. But the biggest shock was not just that a North African marker was present. The biggest shock was the realization that our beliefs about identity are often so far removed from the biological truth. We live in a world of stories, and science is the only thing that can tell us which of those stories are true. In the case of Adolf Hitler, the science revealed a truth that was the exact opposite of everything he stood for. This discovery should encourage all of us to be more curious about our own origins. Instead of fearing what we might find, we should embrace the complexity. Every new marker we discover is another connection to another part of the world. It is another reason to care about what happens on the other side of the planet. If your ancestors were once from those regions, you have a personal stake in their history and their future. The DNA study remains a landmark in forensic history. It proved that even the most powerful individuals cannot hide from the truth of their own biology forever. It showed that history is a living thing carried within us every day. And it showed that the most effective way to fight an ideology of exclusion is to reveal the radical inclusion that is written into the very fabric of our being. As we conclude this exploration, we are left with a powerful image. A man obsessed with a specific hierarchy of blood, carrying within his own veins the proof of a shared, diverse and global human family. It is a lesson that historians, scientists, and all of us will carry forward, buried in archives or obscured by propaganda, but eventually, the science will speak. And what it tells us is that we are all. It proves that the entire project was built on a lie that was contradicted by the very man who conceived it. It is a victory for science, a victory for history, and most importantly, a victory for the truth of our common humanity. We are one species, with one shared history, written in the beautiful and complex code of our DNA. And that is a truth that no bunker, no archive, and no ideology can ever truly destroy. The science of genetics has given us a new way to see the past, and in doing so, it has given us a new way to see the future. A future where we can acknowledge our diverse roots while celebrating our shared destination. It is the story of the day science finally caught up with the myths of the past, and replaced them with the far more beautiful and inclusive reality of our shared biology. It is a reminder that we are all in our most fundamental state, connected by the same ancient threads of life. Looking back at those Austrian villages and North African tribes, we see the echoes of the same human spirit. We see the ingenuity, the resilience, and the drive to move toward a better life. This is the truth that our DNA preserves. It is a record of our collective success as a species. No matter whose body it is found in, the genetic code remains a testament to the fact that we are all related. We are all migrants, and we are all part of the same grand, global family. The science is in, and the results are definitive. The past was mixed, the present is mixed, and our future depends on our ability to embrace the inclusive truth of our shared genetic destiny.